Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we are traveling deep into the humid, shadow-filled nights of Indonesia to explore one of the most terrifying and culturally specific entities in Asian folklore. While the West has sheet ghosts that look like cartoons, Indonesia has something far more visceral and disturbing. We are talking about the Pocong. In Islamic burial traditions common in the region, the deceased are wrapped tightly in a white shroud, tied at the head, the neck, and the feet. But there is a strict rule. The ties must be undone before the grave is closed. If they are not, the soul is said to be trapped, unable to move on, forced to hop from its grave to beg the living for release. Imagine waking up to the sound of something heavy hitting your front porch, only to look out and see a face rotting behind a tight white cloth, pressing against the glass. Make sure you stay with me until the very end of this video. After these three harrowing true stories, I am going to break down the deep cultural significance of the burial shroud and why the specific superstition holds such a powerful grip on the Indonesian psyche. Our first story takes us to the outskirts of Jakarta, to a construction site that had been plagued by delays and accidents. It comes from a man named Arif, who worked the graveyard shift as a security guard. Arif was used to the night. He was used to the humidity, the mosquitoes, and the distant hum of the city traffic. But the construction site where he worked was different. It was an abandoned apartment complex that had been restarted by a new developer. The concrete skeletons of the towers loomed over the guard post, creating long, jagged shadows that seemed to stretch and grasp at the ground. It was a Tuesday, around 2 a.m. Arif was sitting in the small guard booth, watching a portable TV with the volume turned low. The air was thick and still, the kind of weather that precedes a heavy tropical storm. He turned off the TV to save the battery, and that is when he heard it. Thump. It was a heavy, dull sound, like a sack of rice being dropped onto the pavement. It came from the direction of Tower B, the structure closest to the perimeter fence. Arif grabbed his flashlight. He assumed it was kids trying to steal copper wire or scrap metal. He stepped out of the booth, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the humid mist. He shouted out, asking who was there. Silence answered him. Then he heard it again. Thump, thump. The rhythm was wrong for footsteps. It wasn't a left-right cadence. It was a singular impact, followed by a pause, then another impact. It sounded wet. Arif walked toward Tower B, his heart rate climbing. The sound was getting closer, but he couldn't see anything. He swept the light across the gravel and the weeds. As he rounded the corner of the unfinished lobby, the smell hit him first. It wasn't the smell of garbage or sewage, which is common in the city. It was the sharp, stinging scent of camphor and decaying flowers, the specific mixture used to mask the scent of a dead body during a funeral. Arif froze. The smell was overwhelming. He shined his light toward the entrance of the tower. Standing there, about 20 feet away, was a pillar of white. It looked like a human, but rigid. The arms were bound tightly against the torso by white fabric that was stained brown with earth and fluids. Above the shoulders, the cloth was tied in a knot at the very top of the head, leaving the face exposed. But the face was not human anymore. The skin was dark and shriveled. The eyes were hollow black pits, and the cotton stuffed in the nose during the burial had turned black with rot. Arif couldn't breathe. He watched as the entity moved. It didn't walk. It launched itself into the air, stiff as a board, and landed with that heavy, wet thud. It hopped toward him. Arif turned and ran. He didn't look back. He sprinted for the guard post, his boots slipping on the loose gravel. He could hear the thumping behind him, faster now. Thump, thump, thump. It was gaining on him. He threw himself into the guard booth and slammed the door, locking it. He crouched below the window, hyperventilating. The thumping stopped right outside the door. Silence returned to the site. Arif waited for what felt like hours, praying, his eyes squeezed shut. Slowly, he stood up to peek out the window. There was nothing there, just the empty construction site. He let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. But then, a soft tapping sound came from the glass right next to his ear. He turned his head slowly. Pressed against the glass, illuminated by the faint light of the street lamp, was the face. The shroud was dirty, the knot on the head brushing the top of the window frame. The hollow eyes were staring directly at him. Arif passed out. The morning shift found him unconscious on the floor of the booth. He quit that same day. He never told his boss why, but the other guards knew. They had smelled the camphor too. While Arif managed to escape with his life, our next story proves that sometimes the horror doesn't come from a random encounter, but from a mistake made by those we trust. This story comes from a village in central Java, a place where tradition dictates every aspect of life and death. A woman named Ratna shared this account about her grandmother's funeral. When Ratna's grandmother passed away, it was the rainy season. The village was flooding, and the cemetery was becoming a muddy swamp. The family was in a rush to complete the burial before the roads became impassable. The local Modin, the man responsible for the religious rites, was working quickly. The body was washed, perfumed with camphor, and wrapped in the white kafan cloth. They carried the body to the grave through the pouring rain. The hole was filling with water. In the chaos and the mud, as they lowered the body into the earth, a critical step was missed. The Modin, usually so careful, was distracted by the collapsing mud walls of the grave. He placed the wooden boards over the body and signaled for the earth to be shoveled in. He forgot to untie the knots, specifically the knot at the top of the head. That night, the rain didn't stop. Ratna was sleeping in the front room of the family house, exhausted from the grief and the labor of the funeral. Around 3 a.m., she woke up. The house was wooden and sound traveled easily. She heard a scratching sound at the front door. Scritch, scritch. She thought it was a stray cat seeking shelter from the storm. She tried to ignore it, but then a voice drifted through the cracks of the door. It was faint, hoarse, and sounded like it was struggling to speak through a gag. It said, "Lepaskan," which means release me. Ratna felt the blood drain from her face. The voice sounded exactly like her grandmother, but distorted, as if coming from underwater. "Lepaskan Talinya." The voice groaned. "Untie the knot." Ratna pulled the blanket over her head, trembling. She knew the lore. She knew what it meant. But fear paralyzed her. The scratching got louder, turning into banging. The door shook in its frame. Then the banging stopped. Ratna thought it was over. She lowered the blanket and looked toward the window. The shutters were closed, but there was a gap in the wood. Through that gap, she saw something white moving back and forth. Suddenly, the smell of wet earth and camphor filled the room. It wasn't drifting in from outside. It was inside the room. Ratna slowly turned her head toward the corner of the room where the shadows were deepest. Standing there, dripping with mud and rain, was the shrouded figure of her grandmother. The white cloth was soaked and clinging to the body. The knot at the top of the head stood straight up, mocking her. The entity wasn't moving. It was just standing there, vibrating slightly. Ratna screamed. Her parents rushed into the room and turned on the lights. The figure was gone, but the floor where it had stood was covered in a puddle of muddy water and 3 distinct maggots. The next morning, the family went to the grave. They dug it up. Sure enough, the knot was still tied. They untied it, praying for forgiveness, and reburied her. The hauntings stopped, but Ratna says she can still smell camphor whenever it rains heavily at night. Our final story takes place in the modern hustle of a ride-sharing driver's life, proving that these entities don't just stay in villages or abandoned buildings. Dedi was a driver for an online taxi service in Bandung. It was late, past midnight, and he was about to turn off his app and go home. Just as he reached for his phone, a notification pinged. It was a high-fare ride, a long trip from the city center out to a residential area near the Cikadut cemetery. Against his better judgment, he accepted. Money was tight. He picked up the passenger near a hospital. It was a woman dressed in a long coat, keeping her head down. She got into the back seat without saying a word. Dedi confirmed the destination and started driving. The drive was quiet. Too quiet. Usually, passengers would look at their phones, the light illuminating their faces. But when Dedi glanced in the rearview mirror, the back seat was pitch black. He couldn't see the woman at all. As they left the city limits and the streetlights became sparse, the car began to feel heavy. The engine whined, struggling to accelerate up hills that were usually easy. The temperature in the car dropped noticeably, fogging up the windows. Dedi tried to make small talk to break the tension.
"Cold night, isn't it, miss?" No answer. He glanced in the mirror again. This time, a passing car's headlights illuminated the back seat for a split second. The woman wasn't there. Sitting in the middle of the back seat was a Pocong. The face was green and peeling, the eyes wide and milky white, staring directly into the rear view mirror, meeting Dedi's gaze. The mouth was open in a silent scream, revealing black gums. Dedi slammed on the brakes. The car skidded to a halt on the dark road. He spun around to look at the back seat. It was empty. He was breathing hard, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. He convinced himself he was hallucinating from fatigue. He looked at the app. The destination was still another 2 kilometers away. He decided to cancel the ride and just go home. But the car wouldn't start. The engine sputtered and died. Then he heard a sound from the roof of the car. Thump. Something heavy had landed on top of the vehicle. The metal roof groaned under the weight. Then, a white, cloth-wrapped face slowly lowered itself over the windshield, hanging upside down from the roof. It tapped on the glass with its forehead. Tap. Tap. Dedi didn't think. He didn't pray. He acted on pure adrenaline. He cranked the key, pumping the gas pedal frantically. The engine roared to life. He slammed the car into gear and floored it. The thing on the roof rolled off with a screeching sound as he sped away. He drove like a maniac until he reached a 24-hour gas station. He jumped out of the car, shaking. The attendant looked at him with wide eyes and pointed to the car. "Sir," the attendant said, "your roof." Dedi looked. The roof of his car was dented inward, as if a heavy log had been dropped on it, and smeared across the windshield was a streak of dirt and something that looked like dried blood. Dedi never drove at night again. So what exactly is the Pocong? And why is this specific image so terrifying to Indonesians? As I mentioned in the intro, the Pocong is directly tied to the Muslim burial shroud, or kain kafan. In Islamic tradition, the body is treated with immense respect, washed and wrapped in seamless white cloth. The knots are functional. They keep the shroud in place during the transport to the grave. The belief is that for 40 days after death, the soul remains close to the earth. If the knot is not untied, the soul is literally physically bound. It cannot leave. The hopping motion, which is often depicted in movies, is actually a subject of debate. Traditional lore suggests they don't just hop, they glide or float just above the ground. But because their feet are tied, they move in a rigid, vertical manner that looks like hopping. From a rational perspective, encounters with Pocong can often be attributed to pareidolia, the psychological phenomenon where the brain forces random patterns into recognizable images. In Indonesia, white sacks, banana trees wrapped in plastic to protect the fruit, or hanging laundry can easily look like a shrouded figure in the dark. Combined with the intense cultural conditioning and fear of the dead, the brain fills in the terrifying details, the rotting face, the hollow eyes. Furthermore, the smell of camphor is a strong sensory trigger. Because it is used almost exclusively for funerals in Indonesia, smelling it out of context immediately triggers a fear response and thoughts of death, potentially causing hallucinations. But that doesn't explain the dents on Dedi's car, or the muddy footprints in Ratna's room. What do you think happened? Was it just the stress of a grieving family and a tired driver? Or is there really something that lingers when we forget to untie the final knot? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more true ghost stories from across Asia.